27th, 2021. Time is 5:15 PM. Joanne, would you do a roll call vote? Roll call, please.
Here.
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 Thank you, Joanne. Commissioners, are there any changes to the agenda? All righty, hearing none. It's time for public requests. If you'd step up to the podium, give your name and address if you would like to, and you will have 5 minutes. We'd love to hear from you. Come. It's up to you. It's whatever you're more comfortable with. I'd like to see your face. Oh, there you
Nice
are.
to see everybody. My name is Alec Schultz. I live at 1320 Southwest 14th Drive in Boca Raton. A couple of years ago, I was previously before this board in my capacity as the president of the Boca Raton Little League regarding a project to refurbish the batting cages at Sugar Sand Park and Patchogue Park, which was a great success. And I thank all of you for that as well. It gets tremendous amount of use and a lot of people were very grateful. I'm here today to bring up an issue that is somewhat similar in the baseball context, specifically availability of city baseball fields and the number of city residents required to obtain permits on those fields. Specifically, there is in the last year plus been an incredibly high demand for, among other things, the two larger fields here at Sugar Sand Park, Sugar Sand 5 and 6, which are the full-size baseball fields like you would play MLB baseball on. Those fields are used by 13-year-olds and up typically. And in the past, there were not as many what are called travel teams seeking access to those fields. They were used by teams affiliated with Boca Raton High School, for example. Little League used them, and there was minimal other demands. So getting permits and access to those fields at reasonable times was less difficult. For whatever reason, there are now 19 teams seeking access to these two fields. And that's in addition to the Little League, which has priority access to those fields through the city. As one can imagine, with that kind of demand, it becomes very difficult for teams that even have substantial Boca Raton residents to access those fields at reasonable times during the day. The folks at the city, Kevin Beckman, who I know well from Little League, and Joel, have been working very hard to try to maximize access to those fields. They've cut the slots to an hour and a half and had them run later. The issue that I would identify for the board is that currently the policy is that a team that has a single Boca Raton resident has the same priority for these fields as a team such as the ones my children play on that have 9 or 10 out of 12 Boca City residents. Neighboring towns, for example, Delray Beach, and I called them to inquire about field access there, have a requirement that 70% of the team be from Delray Beach residents before they will even give you a single permit for a field there. So it's dramatically different than ours in this city where it's one person. So my request to the board was that there be some consideration of a policy that perhaps allowed teams with a critical mass of Boca Raton city residents, perhaps 5, 6, whatever number the board thought was appropriate in conjunction with working with Mr. Beckman, to have essentially access to those fields and get to pick their 2 monthly practice times first. And then you could go in order for those teams with minimal Boca Raton residents who would then pick later. It would not exclude anyone from use of the fields because there still would be enough space. Those teams would just have to practice at what I would call more or less desirable times, Friday nights or late at night. It's difficult for kids who are in school, to have 9 or 10 kids practicing until 10, 10:15 at night on school nights because of field access issues. And these obviously are, as a team such as my son's, that has ample Beach and Park District taxpayers and city taxpayers. So it's simply just an issue of priority and access to those fields. And I would suggest the board consider a policy that's more in line with what a city like Delray has, at least in the first instance, which would allow city residents to have access to these fields, who are the ones essentially funding and supporting them. So I thank you very much for your time and consideration. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. You said there's 19 teams outside of Little League and like Boca High teams. Who are these teams?
So they're typically, ma'am, well, I refer to them as travel baseball teams. So they're private baseball teams that play in the local travel leagues down here. Many, like my sons play on two of them. I have a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. Many of these teams, like my sons, have substantial Boca Raton residents. They're higher level players. They've gone outside of past Little League, and now they play on these teams, and they're getting ready for high school. However, there are teams, because these fields are so nice, that try to sort of cherry pick and play gamesmanship with the affidavit requirement that Mr. Beckman has, where you have to submit an affidavit of residency. I can candidly tell the board I will call it I'm a lawyer, gamesmanship with that. And all it takes is one person to submit an affidavit. And then those people get the same access to the fields that, my son's team does, that has 9 of our 11 players are city residents. So it's essentially that extra amount of teams from all over the area, Coral Springs, Boynton Beach, that try to come down because there's just not that many fields of that type.
And so they're all still kids, like below high school level?
Yes, ma'am.
That are playing in those?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, and what about the Spanish River fields? Are those not?
So those don't have pitching mounds, and
Okay.
the infield is not a 60-foot mound and 90-foot bases. So it's not essentially usable for
Right.
a normal baseball
Okay.
practice.
Okay.
But again, this proposal that I would suggest the board consider would not actually exclude anyone. If you had one true Boca resident, you'd still be able to get permits, just on a lesser priority.
Okay.
Brianne, would you want to work with Mr. Beckman on this and bring back some kind of a policy so that we can share that with Mr. Schultz?
Sure will.
Madam Chair, I know there's other organizations that have a percentage requirement that's much higher than one person getting a permit. I'll share that with Brianne and ask her to try to bring some parity here, because I understand what Mr. Schultz is saying about these travel teams. So we'll see what we can do, Mr. Schultz, with Brianne's investigation to give you some relief, if that's possible.
I thank the board, and again, no one's bad intentions. Everyone's just trying to have kids play baseball, but there's fields are hard to find. So I just want to stand up for the city residents who are paying for them.
Stay in touch, Mr. Schultz, please.
Thank you all for your
It's
time.
good to see a face with the email. So,
Yes, thank you all very much.
Mr. Chaffee.
Name is Harold Chaffee, 6200 Northwest Second Avenue in Boca Raton, Florida. I just was looking at the agenda and noticed that Miller Lake had an article, or I guess a response that was requested about P3s. And then I read more and more about P3s throughout the whole agenda. More and more responses, more and more looking into the P3s. Is this the way you're going to go? With the P3s first, then you're going to have charrettes and ask people? I have a concern about that.
I'm not sure.
There was just a lot of input about the P3s, right? Private-public
I think
partnership.
that, Mr. Gorin, would you address that for Mr. Chaffee so that he's,
In anticipation of tonight's meeting, Harold, good evening. Nice to see you. We also prepared a memorandum to assist the board in deciding and understanding how the 3P process works. It's a statutory issue. It's not something that they're creating. It's in Florida statutes. The statute was amended in 2016. It was established in 2014. There are 2 different kinds of 3Ps, or P3s, depending upon where you sit in the room. The end result is that many come in unsolicited. Some are solicited. At the moment, I don't think the board's taken any public action to require a P3 or a 3P, but there may be unsolicited proposals that may come their way. If they do come their way, there is a process in the statute that governs how they should treat them or react to them, which is either favorably or to go through a process to get to the next level of conversation. There's nothing that's on the record between the public and this entity today, which is committed to a 3P project. It's an option, and the statute contemplates the option. It either allows the governmental agency to propose itself to go to a 3P program, or to take unsolicited proposals for which there then must be a process implemented. So nothing's been established as a matter of law just yet.
We hire Miller Lake yet?
we're still reviewing the scope of work. Brianna's meeting with each one of us before we have, actually have the scope of work and the contract. And we hope to have that
Laura, the response that he wrote was in response to you asking him for a scope of work that he would be doing?
This letter that he wrote was in response to me asking him to clarify where it will fit in the process. A meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, just to interrupt,
go
but
ahead.
a meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, it was kind of unclear how the process would even fit into the master planning. And what would happen is the P3s would happen towards the end of the master planning process. The first step would be to get the public input. And later, once the design is done, let's say this board says, you know what, we're gonna have tennis, golf, walking trails. We can go out and say, hey, everybody, who wants to participate in this? And then that would be the point where we would solicit P3s to help fund some of those things. But it's not happening right now. We're not doing anything in reverse order. It's just a matter of getting the information out there and making sure we're all on the same page about where it fits into the process.
Okay, which I had a concern because the company that hasn't been hired yet has given comments.
I asked him for that. I asked him to look
Okay.
at the meeting that we had on Monday and write how he's dealt with it.
Like
And
the
where it would
highlight
fit.
right now is the P3s. How can we get
Well,
through the P3s? How can we work around the system and give the land away to somebody who can and
I
profit on it?
think that's a stretch. I think the board just all wants to be on the same page about how it will work in the process.
May I put, Mr.? There has been no decision whatsoever on P3s or public, strictly public ownership or what is going on the property. Okay, this is
You can
just a
understand
part
why-
of the process.
You can
P3s are not getting any priority. They're not being emphasized. Okay, this is just a clarification. So in the event somebody comes to us with a public-private property proposal, we know how to handle it from a legal standpoint.
Right.
That's all that's happening.
Okay, because I haven't seen anything about hiring them. I didn't hear anything about charrettes or any meetings with the public or anything like that. Like just see
There will
more
be
and more.
charrettes before we make any decision.
Thank you.
Take care. Would anyone else like to speak? Public requests are now closed. It's time to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on September 13th, 2021. It's found on page 1 of your agenda packet. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay. Joanne, would you do a roll call vote?
Yes.
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 Yes,
And for the record, Mr. Ernst is now here, Joanne, so. Okay. All right. We also have to approve the minutes for the first public trim compliance hearing that was held on September 15th, 2021. It's found on page 7 of your agenda packet. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Thank you, Mr. Ernst. Any discussion? Joanne, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
yes.
All righty. Our first item of regular business is Boca Chica pickleball found on page 10. Brianne, would you like to lead us off, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, on page 10 of your agenda packets is a memo detailing some additional information we found out as we investigated further, building pickleball courts out where the old tennis courts are at Boca Chica. And the city would actually require restrooms, a water fountain, and basically infrastructure over there for those courts. So we didn't pursue it anymore as far as getting costs, because at this point, there's alternatives. You know, you could leave it alone. You could do what I put an example of some public artwork, like people are building these art playgrounds on some of these structures, if you wanted to add some color and dynamic over there. So there's some options. And I basically, before we continued pursuing pickleball, I wanted to just get some input tonight and direction on what path you wanted to take.
Thank you, Brianne. Commissioners, I'll lead off with you, Commissioner Wright.
I think we should just leave it alone at this point. I think we should get it going with Miller Lake, and, you know, we're cleaning up those 3 corners. I just don't understand the point of, I love public artwork and we can incorporate that into the master planning. But at this point, I don't see why we would do it now.
Thank you, Commissioner Ernst.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would say I initially brought this up with the intent that it was a minor cost, not a big cost. And with the thought that this could take 1 year or longer. And we haven't gotten our contract yet with Miller Lake, so it takes time and I'm okay with waiting for that. The memo done by Brianne and Melissa was very insightful. I think it's important to note. We only started this when the community started playing pickleball by themselves out there. And then we put up fences and we took them down. So my thought is unless the city wants to waive a fountain and restrooms and all the other things, I wouldn't spend the money doing it. So it's not really in our court. We can't do this and it's not good, prudent sense of taxpayer dollar. I think it will take a little while to get this whole flushed out, the whole thing, what will happen, what's the best use of everything. So I agree. For now, let's park it. As far as art goes out there, if it is a very low cost and it makes it look better, I'm fine with it, but it's not the immediate priority. The priority is with the Miller Lake agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins.
I support both what Aaron and Commissioner, what is your name? Craig.
That's it. Yeah, you're-
I'm sorry, Craig, a senior moment. I agree with what both commissioners have already said. Nothing else to add.
Commissioner Engel?
Yeah, just to throw my penny and a half's worth. I agree with the other commissioners. This is something that really needs to wait till we develop a master plan for the property. And at that point, we can make a decision based on what we get input from the community and costs, et cetera. What is in the best interest of the community to put there. That may or may not include pickleball. As far as using it as a place to display arts, kind of like what was done at Spanish River Beach. That might not be a bad idea. I don't know, though, if I want something that would be permanent. So if we could figure out a way to do it temporarily, then I don't have any problem with it.
I think we're hiring Miller Lake for a reason. And this is not for the public to know. We are not dismissing pickleball. We just want to get the big scope and the big picture so we know how to use your taxpayer dollars prudently. So let's move on to the Miller Lake update on page 12 of your agenda packet. Brianne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, on page 12 is a memo from Miller Lake. And as I mentioned earlier during public comment, this was basically just to kind of recap how the process works because there was some confusion at a previous meeting. We are getting calls and interest from third parties who want to do stuff on the property. And so how do we handle that now while we're in this phase of master planning? And Miller Lake just went through and drafted this memo just to kind of put that before you guys have seen the scope now, and you know that that'll be part of the later process after the charrettes are done and all that stuff is finished. But for now, it was just highlighting how this would work and how it would be incorporated into the program. I thought having that information from them would be helpful just for clarity so that we don't have any other hiccups in that process. And then our fantastic attorneys also wrote a memo detailing the legal ramifications and qualifications to enter into PP3. So I will turn it over to Mr. Gorin for some input on that.
And Madam Chair, good evening, and thank you again.
Thank you for being here.
We prepared a fairly lengthy explanation of the 3P program under the statute. And I think clearly for the record, as the speaker earlier had inquired, this board has taken no public position, has taken no motion, no resolution, no action of any legal kind to in fact engage in a 3P program. It is a legal option available depending upon what your choices are as things progress regarding the overall project at Ocean Breeze. The second part of which is that if you choose not to, and some entity submits an unsolicited proposal to you, there's a method by which you can, or depending upon your disposition, may not respond to it. But if you do decide at some future moment to engage in a 3P program, the statute has some very severe, I use that word just as a matter of discussion, very specific and severe requirements as to how you have to follow the statute in the context of all this issue. One of the more important parts of the statute is the advent of public comment, public involvement, and public process, which runs throughout the entire statute. Everything is very transparent. You can't hide behind the statute to engage any particular 3P proposer because you want that proposer. So for example, if someone submits a highly qualified proposal, deeming it to be theoretically highly qualified, you have to open the, if you choose to use that process, you must open the door for others to submit equal or different or, qualified projects as well. So it is a significant project. We anticipated that you would want to read this memo in some detail, digest it, notate it, mark it up as you see fit, but we wanted to give you the framework and a bit of a constitutional basis and legal basis under the statute so that as if and when Miller Lake begins to be engaged by you formally, that you'll know what you're looking at. Now, we've had some calls from people as well as lawyers for the district. What do you do if you have a proposal? The answer is the board has made no decision regarding 3P. At the end of the day, if, as and when they do, we will advise the board what their legal obligations and responsibilities are and give them the choices which the statute provides to you. So we gave you it's a pretty long laundry list. This is not right from the statute, but it tracks the statute in more ways than one. We highlighted and bold-faced certain provisions that are articulately clear. There's advertisement requirements. There's all manner of things and the various steps that are required, all of which requires public disclosure, public review, public posting and such that makes it a very transparent and open process. And I know that that's of concern to this board. This project is of great concern going through some of the iterations that have happened over the past couple of years and your emphasis on how to get something going. So we wanted to make sure that in the upfront part of the conversation that we gave you some guideposts to work from. And that's the main reason for the memorandum. It was initiated by your own direction to us in the context of moving ahead.
In the interest of the transparency, Mr. Gorin, would this process kind of mirror the RFP process so that, anybody interested in responding could respond in the
Yes.
same way? We would have dates.
If I can respond, I think that our
deadlines.
intention was, as opposed to any one of you or professional staff, particularly Brianne, being put upon by a third party that may well have the best project in the world. I don't know the answer there, nor do we know that until we know that. We wanted to be able to use this memorandum as a premise to say to third parties, here's our lawyer's memorandum to take a look at it, review that with your folks to understand what the process is. Most people who would otherwise seek to engage in a large project of some sort will know what the statute says. They'll have consulted with their professional staff to know how to work it. But we would like to be able to be sure that in the event that you're called upon, you're contacted by third parties, this is a public record. We intended it to be a legal public record so that if anyone had a question or a doubt as to how the process works, that this would be a roadmap to get you there, to protect all of you from third parties and have third parties know what their approach would be or could be.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Gorin? Commissioner Wright?
I don't think so. I'm just unclear about one thing, probably maybe too specific, but it says that you can get unsolicited proposals.
Correct.
So if you get an unsolicited proposal that's specific to something, are you saying that we have to go and like open it up
Well,
according to that specific
There's-
project type?
for some reason, the page numbers are missing, which I regret. But if you look, you're looking at the second page under Article 2 procurement, and in the first, second, third paragraph, if the district chooses to evaluate an unsolicited proposal involving architecture, engineering, et cetera. So at the end of the day, if you get an unsolicited proposal and that's not the path you want to be on, you're not legally obligated to consider it.
Right,
But if you do, the process in the statute gives you the premise on how to get to a review of that, which would be the unsolicited proposal and any other through a process.
Okay, but it's not like legally, we don't have to open it
Correct.
up. We can
So-
look at that specific proposal and.
You can look at it. It's a public record. Once they submit it to the entity, to the district,
Mhm.
it's a public record. You could then take a look at it publicly. You can say, we would like to consider this. If that's the case, direct staff to follow the statute and open up the door for others to submit as the statute requires. Or
Okay,
you could look at it public and say, this is not really what we're looking for.
okay,
Or this is not aligning with our thinking, or it's not even consistent with hypothetically Miller Leg's proposal. So you have the right to say, thank you very much. We're moving on.
okay,
You're not legally bound to, if you get that proposal.
Okay.
That's how we read the statute.
gotcha.
Commissioner Ernst?
No, Madam Chair, I'm comfortable with what was provided. I guess I would say that This P3 is an option. It's just one option as others are. And I think we should consider all options. And that's why we hired Miller Lake. They said they could do this as well as finding grant money and other items. So it's got a little bit, long ways to go actually before it gets anywhere.
Commissioner Rollins?
Well, as Commissioner Ernst said, it's a long way to go before we get anywhere. And I think that the thing that was helpful in the response from Miller Lake is that they said that, you know, we should not get ahead of ourselves and we should be just deciding what the public wants in place before we start entertaining any offers from a P3 partnership. And like I'm sure rest of everyone here, I have been solicited. I've not taken the opportunity to review any PPPs. But as Craig said, that may be an option to get projects advanced further, but I'd have to see a lot of data and have to hear from the public before I would end up wanting to turn over publicly acquired property to an individual business for a profit-making venture.
Commissioner Engel?
You know, this is, as Commissioner Rollins stated, this is the first step. This is not giving any preference to any mode of operation, any type of facility that will go on the property. We're just trying to find out. And hopefully, you know, we'll get this thing done once and for all. We won't make everybody happy. Hopefully we'll make enough people happy so that life can go on.
Madam Chair, if I can offer one more thing, just to clarify. And I regret that the page numbers didn't transist to the hard copy. I don't believe they're numbered, but there's a provision that in the event that a 3P proposer submits a package to you, it is very hyper technical. They can't just send you a letter and say, we want to give you X number of dollars for Y number of projects for Z number of conclusions. There are things in the statute, there are components in the statute that are very technical and very specific. And those are in Article 3 referencing project approval requirements, which range from describing the project, including the conceptual design or of the facilities or a conceptual plan for the provision of services and the schedule for the initiation and completion of the qualifying project, to going on to talk about the description of the method by which the private entity proposes to secure the necessary property interest, et cetera. There's a whole litany of things that are required by a proposer. They can't just simply send you a letter and say, here's our letter, sign up. We want to have you sign us up. It's a hyper technical, very requirement laden requirement under the statute, and you get to vet that. I mean, that's on you to be able to make sure it's all in public. There's nothing that's happening in any back room. This is all a public process for which at this moment, you've made no commitments to anybody for anything.
It's a very comprehensive, and it was a lot of work, I know, with
It
you
was.
and Mr. Horowitz. So we thank you very much.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
If you don't have any other comments, we could move on to the third item of regular business, the Matisse Business Services Contract Renewal. Rianne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, on page 21 starts the Matisse Business Services Agreement Renewal. She has gone up $150 a month. You'll see that the list of things that she does for us, as the firm does for us as well, has also grown as auditing has required more, and the various things that we're working on have required some extra bookkeeping and personnel assistance. So tonight I'm looking for approval of this agreement. It also includes some additional addendum that have not been included in previous agreements. And Jacob provided those for us to just keep us on track with complying with all the statutes required. So we're looking for agreement tonight, approval tonight of this agreement to continue using Matisse Business Services.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve this contract renewal?
Madam Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the contract.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a disclosure. And Sam, you can tell me if I am able to vote on this. I don't personally deal with, for my business, but I sit on a nonprofit that uses Matisse Business Services for their bookkeeping services. Is that a conflict within the statute?
Quick thinking under chapter 112 is that it's not a voting conflict for you this evening because the nonprofit you sit on, you're one of X number of members. How big is the board?
I'm just one of X number of
X
members.
number of members that approve their contract, correct?
Correct.
I don't see the voting conflict. There's no special private gain or loss that will inure to you because you vote on behalf of Matisse this evening, or a principal that is engaged by you. So I'm not convinced that there would be an issue under the statute. Under section 112.3143, if you had a special private gain or loss, you'd have to recuse yourself from voting and file a Form 8 voting conflict form, but I'm not seeing that in this discussion. It's not a relative. If Matisse is your brother-in-law, you should tell us now probably, but that's probably not the issue.
No, I do not profit or stand to lose from this vote, and I don't see it's in conflict, but I did feel the need to bring that to the table just to be sure.
And that's said tongue in cheek only because of the fact that, quite frankly, unknowingly, sometimes people do make those decisions and don't vet them publicly like you just did. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Joanne, would you do a roll call?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Approval of payroll and invoices, page 30, Mr. Ernst.
Getting there. Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion for for approval of payroll and invoices in the amount of $61,187.93.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? And would you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
Yes.
yes,
Thank you. Reports and discussion, Executive Director Harms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few updates tonight. I want to, first of all, thank some city staff for assisting with a few projects. I want to thank Jason Hayes and his staff member Ron for assisting getting golf carts for a pre-bid meeting at Boca Chica. We also want to thank in the facilities department, Paul, Rick, and Grady for their work getting the leaking and some repairs done at Swim and Racket Center for us upstairs. So thank you to those staff members. At Boca Chica, the demo is going to start today. It should be complete by 10/6, weather permitting. That includes the old maintenance building and some of the other elements on the park that were still out there. I have one item that came up from Ocean Strand that I wanted to speak about tonight and get direction from the board. We have a neighbor who purchased a parcel of land that's adjacent to Boca Chica. Sorry, not Boca Chica, Ocean Strand. They would like to have a construction easement on our property for the duration of building this home on their parcel, which backs up to A1A. It's the very northwest corner of our property. It will border that property. They want to use the roadway that we have to access that property and provide it. They're looking for a construction easement from us in exchange for a donation to the project at Ocean Strand. So tonight I would like to get some direction from the board to work with council and work with this organization to see if we can come to an agreement and provide them the access that they need in exchange for some help with the project. So just looking for I guess, okay to move forward with that.
Does anybody want to comment on that or have a question for Brianne?
oh, did you call me?
Brianne, the question I'd have is, I
Yeah.
would not be so
Really?
much interested. Of course, I'm welcome to a donation, but with a construction easement, they're going to disrupt a portion of our property. And I would think that the city would have an interest in making sure that it doesn't damage any. I mean, we're restricted on what we can do in that property, and the removal of any vegetation or plants and trees and stuff has to be done by hand. I'm not sure how complicated that process will be. I'd be happy to cooperate within the extent that our property is not damaged, and if there is anything, that'll be restored to its pre-damaged condition if the city does permit it.
They were verbally agreeable to that, and I stated that if there was any complications with the city, it would be upon them to figure that out and work that out with them.
Commissioners, do I hear a motion to direct Brianne to work with council for some kind of an agreement with this construction company?
Madam Chair, I'll make the motion to do so.
Second.
No, you beat me to it.
Mr. Rollins seconded.
Just for further discussion though, for Mr. Rollins, I think, they identified a lot of invasives. So the best course of action is to remove the invasive stuff, even if wherever it may be. I wouldn't want to require them to reinstall it after the park. And I don't think that's what your
No,
intent is.
I was only
So-
concerned about those items that the city would be
Yeah.
concerned about too. If they want to move some invasives, then it'd be my guess. But I guess like on our parcel, it has to be done by hand. That was the only thing. And I mean, I'm good with removing the invasives if they can do that. It makes our property a lot more
Yes.
available to the public.
I think we're conceptually on board with the concept that they need to get access and how they do it is, subject to city oversight and, same requirements we would have on it. But they will do what they need to do, but it's all got to be determined really in discussions and some kind of agreement with Brianne.
I just have one question. And so you said it's northwest corner, so it's not anywhere near the water line or
Sorry,
anything?
it is. It's on the intercoastal. It's on the intercoastal
Oh,
side.
it's just-
Yes.
It's close.
It's,
So,
it's the, I don't know if everybody knows where Mr. Petrozelli's house was with the backyard and the dock, but it's his backyard he sold as a separate
Okay.
parcel.
and so, but this wouldn't impede, because I'm assuming the construction will be for quite a while.
So it's a 6-month permit, so we would put a time frame in there that it would not, and if the park were to get open during this time frame, we
Yeah.
would make sure that that was built into the contract, that it wouldn't disturb that
Okay,
area.
okay.
Brianne, when is the permit, has it already taken effect? If not, what's the effective date
For us or for them?
for them?
For them, they were supposed to start October 1 for their project.
Okay,
They don't need the access right away because they're doing the groundwork and things like that, but they would need it, within,
but then it expires March 31st.
right?
And is there any provision? Can they renew it at that point?
They have the option to renew if it's not complete, but I think their goal is to get this house. I think they're building a single family residence.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sure if I can quickly offer.
Please, Mr. Gordon.
If the board adopts a motion to direct that Brianne and I in our office negotiate with the requester for the easement, we're looking at what's otherwise called a temporary construction easement. This is not permanent. This is a temporary construction easement. And there are several components I'd like to put on the record that I would be concerned about to make sure we have them in this discussion. I'll go through a quick list because we had a preliminary conversation about that. Number one, that the document would be called the temporary construction easement. There would have to be a legal description and a sketch because we don't know where it's going to be. But if we have to hire a surveyor or have to hire someone to do that, it shouldn't be at the expense of the district. They're asking for us to make an accommodation. That accommodation has some trappings that require some additional assistance. Permits, we don't issue permits per se, the city issue permits. So as you just described it, we want to make sure that whatever permits are required by both state, federal, local governments are not on the district, but they're on the applicant. And we don't choose to violate any of our relationships because of their entry into our property. Insurance and indemnification, something which I know is near and dear to all of us, which is the fact that in the event that this group comes in and through a contractor or a subcontractor creates a challenge or a problem or creates an issue that could result in damages to the district, we want to make sure we're fully insured and also indemnified by whomever it is that's entering this property, which is delicate, sensitive property, as we all know. We also would want to make sure who the entity is that we're granting the easement to, whether it's the same owner of the property or a different name, or these are all part of the due diligence we were required to deal with. And I'm sure that the cost and expense of having our office look at those issues for this applicant would have to be borne by the applicant and not by the district. The time and length of the permit we've talked about, and also to make sure that if there is a vegetation issue, fencing issue, all manner of things, I don't choose for this to go as a silent issue. These are important topics on a very important piece of property owned by the district, which we choose not to compromise because of someone's need for a private purpose. Because the use is private, the construction easement is not to build on your property, the district's property, but on their property. So we want to make sure that that's done. And if there is, at the end of the day, and in the context of this issue, the document would come back to you for approval. It's not just a one-way issue where we just simply have someone sign off on it and get it done. You'd have to grant that easement as a matter of public discussion, public transparency. And in the event, at the end of the day, there were a voluntary contribution being made. I use the word contribution, I use the word voluntary. That's what it would have to be. If this applicant would choose to make a voluntary contribution, we'd have to have that conversation, which we've yet to have. And measure that and advise you as to what that proposal would be. So those are just some of the lists of things that I think are valid and worth noting this evening before you adopt the motion.
There any other questions for Mr. Gorin?
Well, just kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Gorin said, I'm supportive of the idea of a reimbursement of all fees, including our legal fees, to develop an agreement and some voluntary contribution to, as negotiated, by Brianne with council. So,
We have a motion and a second. Joanne, would you do a roll call vote?
yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
I'd like to mention to Brianne to, in the insurance equation, to follow our previous discussion on limits of liability. And I'd be happy to review that certificate once it's
Thank you
obtained.
very much.
This time, we're going to recess this meeting to convene the final public trim hearing, which is scheduled for 6 o'clock. We're going to give Melissa a couple minutes to adjust the virtual aspect of the meeting. And so I will need a motion to recess.
Make a motion to recess.
Thank you. Any discussion? Joanne, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes.
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 Okay, we'll be back as soon as I get the okay from Melissa.
Sure.